Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Welcome, everyone, to the Future Society, broadcasting from the past, but talking about the future. Today, we have Scott Gunnigle and Isador Lieberman. Dr. Lieberman is a spinal surgeon and actually pioneering some new technology that I think will be very interesting to talk about. And Scott Gunnigle is helping him do that. He's been in medical devices for a very long time. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about the connection between the brain and the spine. And, Dr. Lieberman, I'd like for you to introduce yourself a little bit. And Scott, I want to hear about your life and what brought you to work with Dr. Lieberman. And then we're going to talk about some interesting topics today, including the way that the brain communicates with the spine. So Dr. Lieberman, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for hosting the podcast. I'm excited about it. I think this has a lot of potential for disseminating information. As mentioned, I'm Isador Lieberman. I'm an orthopedic and spine surgeon. I've been at this for 32 years now. I started my career in Toronto, Canada. I was recruited to the Cleveland Clinic, where I worked there for 13 years, then was subsequently recruited to the Texas Back Institute, where I've now been for 13 years. I principally do deformity work, revision work, tumor work, so high acuity spinal reconstruction. Over the years, I've been involved in a number of different startups, initiatives, development projects. Without elevating my stature beyond anything, I don't deserve multiple patents, started a couple companies. We have another company right now that we're working on. I have done some work on the brain spinal cord connection, as you had mentioned earlier prior to this, and done some work on exoskeleton work as well. So there's a lot of insight that I'm looking forward to share.
Scott, tell us a little bit about your history in medical devices.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Scott Gunnigle. I've been in medical device for 30 years, primarily in emerging technologies, from brain stimulation to innovation in the spinal cord. That's where Dr. Lieberman and I met so many years ago, and was compelled to assist and come alongside this company called Isador Medical with this exciting platform that we're developing.
That's great, guys. I'm really excited to talk with you about the way that the brain communicates with the spinal cord, specifically something that you mentioned, Dr. Lieberman, which is exosuits, which I think is something, to me, when I think about the future, I think about exosuits, right? Like the idea of a mecha from anime able to tear through a town, or, when you're looking at Aliens and Sigourney Weaver has this giant exosuit that she's fighting
One of my favorite movies,
Alien Queen. Yeah. Like when I think exosuits, I think that, right? What I think that all of us want to know is how do we get there, right? That's something that I want to talk to you about today, because I love exosuits and I think it's such a cool, interesting vision, but I want to know how to get there.
So I've been involved in a number of initiatives looking at exoskeletons, essentially empowering them, coordinating the gait properly. There are multiple exoskeletons that are already in use right now, particularly for industrial use, much like Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, where you're moving heavy bits. So essentially you're taking a forklift, wrapping it around a human and using that to move objects. But clearly what we were most interested in, and this is 20 and 25 years ago, getting paralyzed patients up and walking. It did prove much more difficult than we anticipated for multiple reasons, but the two biggest reasons was bridging that interface between the brain, the spinal cord, and essentially the extremities. How do you get the signal down there was the first thing. And then also the biomechanics behind it. We did not have the technology 25 years ago that we had today. The battery power, the gearing that was required, the polymers that were needed to make something lightweight that you could actually get on and off a paralyzed patient. So there were a lot of limitations early on, but we had to take that first step. And this is what it is, take the first step. And over the years, there's a couple of the exoskeletons that are out there now that are being used predominantly for medical rehab for stroke purposes. They're just not practical yet to get people with spinal cord injuries walking. Now, having said that, the future is not exoskeletons. The future is going to be neural links with microprocessors that are going to be implanted in the brain and in the lower extremities, wherever it may be. And there's a lot of smart people. I'm not really involved in that, but I've tried to keep up in what they're doing. But microprocessors that can send that electronic signal to keep the muscles going, to keep the joints going through their full range of motion. And the step beyond that, that's even more exciting, is actually neural regeneration, recreating, rebuilding that link. And one of the analogies, and I have been involved in some of these projects, one of these analogies is evolution. And if you look at a salamander in the middle of the Serengeti in Africa, and he goes running across the Serengeti, and a hyena comes up and grabs that salamander by the tail, rips his tail off, the salamander takes off. The salamander regrows the tail. He survives. The salamander is way down, though, on that evolutionary tree. Now you take a human, you take one of us, we go running across the Serengeti, and here comes that lion, and the lion bites us in the Achilles tendon, grabs us, but we're strong enough, we fight off the lion, scare the lion away, but we're sitting there with a ripped up leg. We can't regrow that leg because we're way up on that evolutionary tree. So what do? We heal with scarring. And the trick here is to make the healing process more like the salamander, where you can regrow with native tissue as opposed to regrow with scarring. Now, a number of my colleagues and friends, particularly at the Cleveland Clinic, had done that with heart muscle already. So there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to be doing that with spinal cord tissue. It's just a matter of time and figuring out the biology, the physiology, the chemistry behind doing that. So we've gone from exoskeletons to microprocessors linking to the ultimate answer, which is regrowth, regeneration of the spinal cord itself.
I hear what you're saying. And, if a couple things that I wanted to talk about. Number one, I still think there's a place for exosuits, right? I think that the idea of compounding human strength is something that would be valuable for a society, right? Like just like what we're talking about with the ability to pick up large loads as a human being, I'm limited in the amount that my muscles can tolerate, right? But if I had the ability to use an exoskeleton to take those large loads, it would allow us to do work differently. And I think it would be very influential for quality of life, because as we get older, we can supplement the muscles that are failing. Now, in a perfect world, we would have the same quality of life when we're 100 years old as we are when we're 40 years old, but that doesn't exist right now. What I'm looking at is somebody that is 100 years old and is still able to, pick up the groceries without any difficulty because they're wearing an exoskeleton that takes the majority of the load off of them. That's number one. Number two, I think that the idea of regeneration is a very significant metabolic process, and the amount of metabolic energy that is required to regrow, let's say, the loss of a limb would be prohibitive based on our current understanding of biology. I think that if it was just like a severing of a spinal cord, like a slice at the C2 level, right? That would be something that regenerative technology could easily fix. Right? You attach everything together, you put on whatever regenerative technology, and then everything gets done together such that the patient regains the ability to communicate from the brain to the muscles. What I think is important is that I would love to have something like for orthopedics where you cut off an arm, and rather than spend the metabolic energy to recreate that arm, you have the ability to, you know, plug something in that still gives that patient the same function without having to waste the metabolic requirements to go there. So I think there's a lot of still potential with exoskeletons in humanity becoming better, but I still think that there's a ways to go to understanding how the brain communicates with the spinal cord. I feel like we understand it, and that's something that I wanted to talk with you about. But just give me a layman's version of like how the brain communicates to the spinal cord, just so that everybody can be on the same page.
Maybe let's take this down to the basic root of life itself. Why are we alive? Why are we even here? We are here to make sure that the next generation is here. We're here to survive. We're here to propagate. The brain is designed to have us interact with the environment so that we can propagate, protect ourselves, move, do all these other things. The brain itself can't do that on its own. So that's why we have a trunk, a body, arms, and legs. And the brain has to send that signal. But every signal that the brain sends, there's a reciprocal signal coming back. So it knows where everything is in three-dimensional space. It sees, your eyes see a threat. The arm knows how to respond to that threat. So the brain is that central processing unit of it. But it's a huge highway of information going back and forth and up and down. And again, for the sole purpose of staying alive long enough so that we can propagate the next generation. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, but from like a basic level, the brain sends information to our muscles that move our skeletal system. And that wiring is present from this part of our body down, right? So if you have a injury in your cervical spine, yeah, the information is also not able to go back up and down. But the fact of the matter is that it's not doing any of the processing of the movement, of the understanding, like the feeling sensations. The processing happens up here, and the signals are sent down here. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably 85%, 90% of it. There are some reflex loops and arcs in the spinal cord itself.
Yeah.
So you can effectively sever the spinal cord at the C2 level, as you said, but you'll still get a reflex arc. And if you protect the axons, which are those fibers that go down to the muscle, through the cycle of the injury, and you can somehow map them out and link them, you can keep those muscles moving indefinitely. You don't need the brain. That's where the microprocessors come in.
But what I'm saying is that you have the ability right now in the animal models to move a muscle with electrical technology, right? Whether it's
Absolutely.
Neuralink by Elon Musk, I'm sure that you've seen the video where he's able to either have a monkey play Pong with his mind, with an implanted circuit in the mind, or the ability to understand sheep's electrical activity or pigs' electrical activity. The fact of the matter is that in the animal model right now, you can connect something to the animal's brain that allows you to move muscles. And Is it as complex and elegant as the way that we were designed? No, it's not. But there is some ability right now in technology today in 2023 that allows us to move a muscle from the animal kingdom through using electrical technology. So my question to you is, now that we have that technology that's available, how do we get that to the ability to be a consumer product? And I guess maybe Scott might be somebody that
Yeah.
we can talk to about that.
Yeah, so just loads and loads of animal data is going to be necessary. In human trials that are occurring will continue to occur. And then, frankly, public acceptance. And then ultimately, when you were talking about exoskeletons, what came to my mind on the business side is who pays for the exoskeleton for a 100-year-old patient? And that's a real conversation that occurs at many different levels about who in a society is worth that investment. So that there are a lot of sociological questions that are born out of a technology evolution.
Okay, so I'm taking the financing of it aside, right? And we're just focused on the science of it, right? We have the ability right now to send signals from the brain to this through the spine to a muscle endpoint, and it allows some sort of movement, right? Right now, it's only in the animal models. How long of a jump is that from animal models to human models? When we're looking at the future, is this a technology that will make that leap over the course of a decade? Or how long from a regulatory process or just a testing process do you go from animal model to a human model?
Well, you can speak to Dr. Lieberman, but there are exemptions for extreme cases that are given. So I'm sure that these technologies are being utilized in extreme cases today with exemption. And then it's only, from a business standpoint, it's disease state opportunity that companies make their investments in. And so as quickly as they see an opportunity, investors will start putting money into that solution, and we'll move on from there. And much of it around the world, as everybody on this podcast understands, comes from Department of Defense development. And I'm sure the DARPA and groups like that are intimately interested in this technologies.
Yeah, there's actually exoskeletons that they're currently designing for soldiers right now so that they can run further, that they can, lift heavier objects. I'm sure there's a component of it that is built for offensive capabilities as well. But even right now, like there's, Boston Dynamics has their animal model, movement robots that
I only see them dance.
Yeah, no, but there's animals on there too that they're using in the military that just like carries a pack for however many yards or whatever, which from a offensive capability standpoint is huge, right? Like if you can carry an artillery gun with you across the Afghan desert, that's gonna allow you to go places where you were never able to go before. Regardless, I feel like we could go down the rabbit hole of all the potential applications. What I want to do is I want to talk about just how do we make this happen from a neurologic standpoint, right? So
let me just chime in for a second. There's two things that I think we have to make happen to get the technology from the bench to the bedside effectively. The first is really patient advocacy and resources. We need people to speak up. We need people to donate, to provide those resources to do all this work. I'm a very, very close friend of mine, an orthopedic surgeon by the name of Rex Marco, unfortunately sustained a devastating cervical spine injury and is paralyzed, had to shut down his career. He just now rebuilt his life, and in combination with the Reeve Foundation, and he's got the Rex Marco Foundation, and a number of us are helping him out, trying to increase the exposure to this devastating problem, because it is solvable. It is solvable. It's not curable yet. It is solvable right now. But the first thing is patient advocacy. The second thing that we need is to somehow streamline the burdensome regulatory process. And it's not just the FDA, it's the whole environment that we work in.
Yeah.
The medical legal liability, the regulatory liability, the insurance components of it. Getting something done today is so much more difficult than it was 20 years ago and 40 years ago. Yet our technology is better. What we've done is we've created this massive amount of great technology, but it's sitting on the shelf because we can't use it because of the obstructions that we have. It's like we've got these beautiful high-end racing cars sitting at the starting line of a racing track, but there's a big barricade in front that's not letting us go down the racing track to really do what we need to do with this. So we've got to streamline the regulatory process, the bureaucratic process, the medical legal process to get this done. And it's across all aspects of medicine. It's not just spinal cord injury and getting patients walking.
Yeah, I think spinal cord injury is really the lowest hanging fruit of all of this, because one of the things that you mentioned, like a stroke, right? You lose the ability to do the processing up here. And I feel like that's a very difficult thing to regain, reconstructing that processing power, the brain being such a sensitive tissue and, such a difficult to understand tissue. But when we get down to the spinal level, I mean, we understand how that works. The neuron electrochemical gradient that passes an electric signal to a muscle and the muscle contracts. Like, that is something that a high schooler learns. And when we're talking about spinal injury, if even if let's say it's just a slice, right? And if you can bypass that juncture that is injured, I feel like that's something that would be really profound for people who have spinal cord injury. I think that there's like a whole host of, sensory information that would be difficult to understand, because sensory information is much more like the information going this way is, I feel like, more difficult to understand the information going that way. Is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sending the motor signal is a relatively straightforward physiologic process. The issue, even if it's just a single slice, is that you've got hundreds of millions of those nerve fibers, those axons running up and down, and you'd have to line them all up absolutely perfectly, or you'd have to bridge them across that sliced gap absolutely perfectly to get the motor signal down. That is still a relatively straightforward thing. The sensory arc coming back up that involves the proprioception, so your brain knows where the muscle is or where the limb is in three-dimensional space, how it feels, the force against it, the forces at the joint. There's so much more information going back up to the brain than going down to it. And yes, you're absolutely right. So we may be able to get that motor signal down, but someone wants to scratch their head, they're not going to have a nice slow movement here. It's going to be up. And that's what we have to learn how to do. And you're right. That's going to be absolutely much more difficult. But I think it can be done. We've got enough computing power now. We've got enough smart people doing it. And if you line up all those axons going down and going up, you should be able to recreate it.
Yeah, I feel like the argument that I always hear about the electronic potential, or the potential for electronic technology to bridge this gap. The idea that, well, if you don't have the sensory perception, then you're going to do this weird clunky movement. And my argument, like my pushback against that, is that I still think that there's value in just the information going from the brain down, and irrespective of the information going from the body up. And for example, like, let's say you're a construction worker just like Sigourney Weaver's, front loader, where she had the ability to pick something up and put it there. I think that technology exists in other settings, right? Like for example, surgical robotics, right? It's all us sending information to these little things that mimic our hand movements. There's no haptic technology that's coming backwards, right? So the ability to do complex movements, irrespective of the sensory component of feeling, proprioception, those things, I think is still of value. Wouldn't you say?
It's all of value. But isolated, is it functional? That's, I think, we have to differentiate value from function. And the example I'll give you is someone with a diabetic foot. And very often that diabetic foot ends up in an amputation because the foot is not of value anymore. The patient's much more functional with a prosthetic than with a dead, infected foot. So we have to differentiate value and function in that regard. And yes, there is some value to sending the motor signal down, but if it's not functional, if every time you go to scratch your head, you poke yourself in the eye, that doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but some of the applications for what we call telerobotic technology, where you have a setup and you're controlling something from a far distance, is not based on any need for the body to have proprioception. And I think that it would be a much more intimate and elegant way to do it if there was a way where we could use the signals that go from our brain to those instruments, like for example the monkey that's playing pong. And yeah, sorry, you were about
So
to say something.
I'm gonna challenge you a bit on
Yeah.
that. All of the telerobotics, all the robotic platforms out there, and I've designed 2 robotic platforms now for spinal surgery. They do have integral into their design haptic alignment and proprioceptive uh, abilities. And on top of that, particularly with some of the extension, the surgeon extension or cobots, so to speak, you're using the surgeon as the surrogate for the proprioception. So it's in the system there. You're getting all that. A
Wow.
lot of laparoscopic surgery, a lot of endoscopic surgery. You know where the tip of your scope is by virtue of where your elbow is, where your wrist is, how your hand is positioned. So you're learning that. You're acting as a surrogate for the proprioceptive feedback that the instrument itself doesn't have.
Interesting. I didn't know that that was available. So like let's say for proprioception, like the ability of pressure, like when I push into a pillow versus I push into a concrete wall, like I can tell the difference, right? I can tell the difference between like the amount of give that happens.
Yeah. So
How is that translated into telerobotics?
Oh, that's that the robotic arms that I've been involved in their design have pressure sensors. And if you deviate from the axis of where your tool is, if you bend a little bit, you will get alarms that tell you you're bending a little bit too far on this, and it won't let you go beyond that spot. If you force it, you get a shift in the gearing. We call it a shoulder shift in one of the technologies, and the system shuts down immediately. It does not let you operate if you've lost your registration and you have a shoulder shift on there. So they have the inherent electronics and the sensors to know when they've gone beyond their reach or their working volume, or if they're pushing on a piece of bone versus pushing on a piece of soft tissue.
That's what I
We,
want to know.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's what I want
we've
to know. So like right now, if you're pushing, so when I'm retracting and I push into a bone of the face, right? I have that tactile sense that, okay, like I'm stopping. But if I feel like if I have a robot arm and I just hear like a pressure alarm go off, is that how it happens? Like,
There's multiple technologies that again, that we've worked on and we've designed. We've got ultrasonic bone cutting technology now. That is,
yeah, I mean,
it's
yeah,
phenomenal.
I
Okay,
know. I use the bone scalpel also, but
perfect. We've got that on the end of a robotic arm. And depending on the pressure and the impedance, we can tell, are we cutting bone? Are we cutting soft tissue? As soon as that impedance drops off, it lets go. It stops right away. So
oh, so it's a
it,
kill switch. Interesting.
correct. So it knows, it can sense a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
Now, the beauty is with the ultrasonic technology, it doesn't really cut soft tissue. It just puts a little pressure on it. If it's too much pressure, it may char the soft tissue, but it doesn't cut it like a rotating burr or an oscillating
right.
saw would. So it's
Yeah,
much safer when you're using it with a robotic arm that can
right.
sense the pressure
Yeah.
and feel the resistance that you're
Just
up
like
against.
just like a table saw, and like it has the finger sensor, right?
Perfect.
So I've obviously never tried putting my finger into a table saw, so I don't know like how
I
good is
wouldn't
that?
recommend it.
How good is that technology? Is when you've used it, is it have you ever gone too far and you're like, oh, this thing was supposed to go off and it didn't?
So it's good enough that we're at the FDA with some of these projects now. It has
Uh,
not been used clinically yet, and
uh,
that's all that I'm actually at liberty to say.
gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So that's super interesting. Is there objective information out there in the literature right now or the science right now to tell the difference in pressure or impedance or whatever between cutting through bone and cutting through soft tissue? Like, do the electrical engineers that are making this stuff know that, like, okay, if we get to a, let's say, a hypothetical number, like if I get to a value of 34, that means I'm in bone. But if a value of like 72, that means I'm in soft tissue. So the cutoff is going to be this. Do we have that information out there right now?
So I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm not a mechanical engineer. I know
Sure.
enough to be dangerously stupid.
Yeah.
But my understanding is, yes, they do know that. Hanging around with those guys that are building these tools for us, they do know that. And what
Yeah.
they don't know, they've been able to figure out very quickly.
Yeah, I think that artificial intelligence, especially when we have all of this data, when this stuff is being used, it's going to be a very small leap to plug that data into an artificial intelligence algorithm and for them to give us objective information.
Yeah.
But I think one of the great things about being on the cusp of this technology right now is that people like us who have surgical expertise, that's something that would be like the fail-safe for that, right? Like we're like we know that, like, listen, like if I'm putting like this thing 3 centimeters in this direction, like I'm gonna hit the carotid artery, and so you can know not only from uh, a computer telling me that this is dangerous, but just an understanding of the system, knowing that your expertise, knowing that this is also dangerous. So I feel like there's a lot of job security for people like us in medicine, which is nice. What I really look forward to is something I think that you're working on, and I'd love for you to comment on it, is artificial intelligence telling us the ability to make something strong enough versus something that's weak, giving us guidance in the creation of something. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the realm of surgery today, actually it's all of medicine today. We've got diagnostic tools, we know clinical indications, and we have, on the other hand, the execution tools. We've got the robots, the navigations, we've got radiation oncology, chemotherapy, we've got cardiac, uh, different interventions. But what we don't have is the bridge between the diagnostics and the indications and the execution. That's still the art of medicine, the art of surgery. It's still heuristic process. It's trial and error. I'm in the operating room and I think this size implant is the most appropriate. I put it in, it wobbles a little. I need a little bigger implant. I put it in, that's too tight. What I need is the one in the middle. We don't have the one in the middle. That's the art of surgery. And what we need to do is get beyond the art of surgery with the science of surgery, with predictive, prescriptive analytics. I want to be able to see a patient that has this problem, has this anthropometric data, is 6'4", 250 pounds, is a high-level football player, has this spine issue. I want to know what's the right operation for that individual, and here's the technology to execute it. And that's what we're, with Scott and our team, we've got a brilliant team of engineers. We've developed this AI platform that takes us from the art to the science by analyzing the biomechanics along the full length of the spine. So we create a digital twin. We create the patient's actual spine morphologically, meaning the way it looks, and functionally, because we layer in the muscles, the ligaments, and how that spine moves. So we know what it's functioning like in the pathologic or native state, and then we can simulate whatever surgery we anticipate needs to be done. We execute the most appropriate surgery, and then prospectively over time, we amass 100,000, millions of patient data points so that we use the deep learning neural network, the machine learning, and the predictive analytics to know with a feedback loop that next patient coming down the road with the same type of pathology to ensure a successful outcome. And that's what we're doing at Agadam Medical. We've got our software built. The platform is built with 3 components: the human modeling component, the biomechanical analysis component, and then the integrated artificial intelligence at multiple aspects. Every point of the process has some form of AI work, recognizing the spine, recognizing the pathology, analyzing the muscle density, the ligament attachments, building it, putting it together, simulating the biomechanics of various things, measuring the bone density. There's so much that's layered into this. This is 5 years of work that I'm trying to describe in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But that ultimately gives us the most appropriate, least invasive, highly predictable, successful surgical solution for that patient.
I can appreciate the trajectory of the technology that you're talking about, because a lot of it is based on stuff that I have an interest with. Like anthropometric data, to me, is something that's really interesting. I really don't feel like we've tapped into that, a lot of which because it has these ties to unpopular philosophies like comparing races and things like that. And so, for example, in the face, there's this ideal of beauty. It's based on ideal of beauty that compares mainly Caucasian people. It doesn't have a lot of like African American people that are in the population. But regardless, I feel like what I want to talk about is the idea of taking all of this information that is available, 30 decades of research, and using the artificial intelligence to make sense of that data. That's something that I feel like is a really new industry that a lot of people want to know about. Like, for example, they have this large set of data, and maybe I can have Scott comment on this. How do I get some sort of artificial intelligence to analyze that data? Are you guys hiring a artificial intelligence engineer? Like, who are the people that we need to go to talk to about artificial intelligence?
Well, we've been very blessed because a number of our engineering capability now is international. with relationships all over the world. So it's actually an international data pool of software engineers that have a deep understanding of building these neural networks. So as we inform these individual neural networks to inform the aggregate platform, we're going to be able to build that bridge that Dr. Lieberman described to be able to inform better through experience these various data points.
You have like an engineer overseas that you tell them that this is the type of analysis that we want, and then they build a neural network to give you that information?
Well, it's not an or, it's an and, because we tell them what we need them to build, and then they bring with them experiences from other builds and other areas that they inform us of what they're capable of building, and we determine a business plan and and then customers come to us. We've got customers today asking us for some specific builds to power their platforms.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another controversial thing that I feel like that we should really talk about is just this idea of using artificial intelligence to tell us what to do, right? Like, I mean, this is something that you're using as a model to give prescriptive information. Number one, is that something that is regulated at all, like by the FDA? Like, I know that FDA has medical device regulation, so like, how is that regulated? And then number two is, does that give us any sort of like slippery slope where the surgeon over relies on this information, and then that can lead to poor outcomes?
The answer is, and I'll let you weigh in on it as well, Dr. Lieberman, but the answer is yes, it's very concerning. I don't think anybody, I don't think society, I don't think the world knows yet. That's why there's so much controversy around Chat GPT and where we go with this technology that we're building, and are we ready and are we capable? In our narrow segment of Agada Medical, what we're building is a platform to provide empiric data to support and inform the ultimate decision. The clinician's still going to have control over what comes to bear, or the procedure that he or she decides to do, but it's going to be basis thousands and thousands of very specific analogs to determine that pathway. Dr. Lieberman?
Yeah, so absolutely what Scott had mentioned, that this is a decision support tool, and that's the regulatory bucket that the FDA uses. The decision is not made by the software. The decision is made by the surgeon on the basis of the different options that the software can provide the surgeon. One of the things that I learned in the work we've been doing the last 6 years with Agada is the overwhelming, absolutely epically overwhelming amount of biomechanical information that we're able to generate. And there's absolutely no way that my two neurons can assimilate that to come up with the ideal surgical plan here. This is why we need the AI, the computing power, the neural network that can learn beyond what we can assimilate just looking at an X-ray effectively. And that's what we've built at Agada. And as Scott had mentioned, we've got some absolutely brilliant engineers that have helped us with this throughout.
So it's primarily software, or do you guys have any hardware component to this at all?
Oh, my, glad you asked. Yeah, of course we've got hardware.
Yeah.
But the hardware is not our focus right now.
Okay.
The software is the magic. This whole podcast that we've done, it's clear. It's the future, the processing of information is what is the central theme here. We can design any implant we want. That is very, very, very simple to do. That is basic first-year university engineering stuff.
Yeah, but that's like the fun stuff, right? That's like hardware. That's like this huge giant robot shows up and a human steps out of it. It's like
that's not the fun.
Oh, come on, dude! I totally disagree. Let's look at science fiction, right? Science fiction. There's very little science fiction that is based around a software program that goes haywire. But there is so much science fiction.
2001, A Space
Thank you.
Odyssey.
Oh,
Come on.
You're not old.
Come
You're
on,
not
we
old
talked
enough to
about
remember
Sigourney
how.
Weaver, my second favorite movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Software, HAL, the computer that went berserk.
Yes, absolutely. There is definitely, I won't disagree with you. But when you looked at HAL, when you saw that red light, that thing brought a chill down your spine. It's the actual physical thing that you can touch that gets people going, in my opinion. I would also disagree because the volume of information, the volume of like the science fiction media that's out there, like robots are, there's 100 robot movies, and there's maybe, granted, 2001 is a masterpiece, and clearly quality versus quantity is an argument that we could go down, but I feel like the quantity of information, like everybody loves seeing two mechs go at it, especially if they're controlled by human beings.
So let me ask you this. You go to the fireworks show. Do you listen to Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, or do you watch those things blow up in the sky?
Obviously, you watch the fireworks blow up in the sky.
Okay. But if you saw the fireworks without any noise, would they be as exciting as if you had that music behind them? Da 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 da, boom, da da da. It's the combination. It's everything wrapped up together. But the software is the driver of it. Yeah, the visual effect, the hardware part of it, yeah, that's there, but that's easy to do. You can blow up anything in the sky today.
I would go with another analog, Jarvis and Iron Man. Another tremendous.
No, I disagree. Like, Iron Man is what brings people to the seats. So you see Robert Downey Jr. in this mech suit fighting villains. Like, that's what I'm interested in.
The mech suit doesn't do anything without Jarvis.
Oh, come on. Okay.
Yep.
Well, listen, we've reached an hour. I feel like we can agree to disagree, that you guys can think software is great, but I think that the audience knows that the truth of this situation is that the hardware is what brings people to the seats. But we can agree to disagree. And it was so nice speaking with the both of you. Join us next time at the Futurist Society, where we have more in-depth conversation about the future. And it was nice speaking with Dr. Lieberman and Mr. Gunnigle. And we'll see you guys soon. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.